you're watching or listening to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network or on YouTube, depending which platform you prefer to listen or watch to. And it's Neil Geddes-Ward and Andy Chaplin presenting you with another catch-up month of paranormal topics. Last month we did the coronavirus, and of course that's still happening, still going around. Andy, have you got the latest fashion in masks?
I have actually, yeah. I found one that's got a special carbon filter in it. It's supposed to be quite a good one. Whether it'll work or not, I don't know. Probably still get it anyway, but worth a try, isn't it?
Well, I'm using one half of a bra, so that's working for me. It doesn't work so much well in the clubs these days, but hey, we're in a different kind of reality, so anything goes these days. But yeah, everyone's getting slightly more relaxed, or they're trying to be more relaxed about these things. Because I'm hearing lots of people are trying to sneak out to parks and sneak out to high street shopping and things like that. Is that happening in Hertfordshire?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we do have our, Boris's one a day. I heard somebody say that it's actually gone up to two a day. So the thing is, when people see other people out, they assume, oh, they're breaking the regulations. Well, they might not be. They might be going for their one a day walk. So I think, as long as people have social distancing and stay away from each other for a little bit, let's just hope this nightmare ends, because I knew when they said that it's only going to last 3 weeks and, we'll have a lockdown and it will last for 3 weeks. I knew full well what they meant was we'll get everyone adjusted and acclimatized to the situation and then we'll extend it, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. I can't see it going on too long, because literally the economy is just going to crash worldwide. But then again, putting on the tinfoil hat, maybe that's the idea. Maybe this is all part of it.
I think so. I mean, I remember years and years and years ago, a friend of mine having a chat with a lady that was well into ancient economics. And she said every civilization has collapsed due to its economic program, going back to the Romans and all other sorts of civilizations and things like that. Don't know what the reasons they collapsed were, whether it was intentionally or just an accident. And so she said this one will eventually collapse anyway. And that was about 30 years ago, I was told that. So I kind of thought, so now here we are. We're on the brink of economic disaster worldwide because no one's actually working, or very few people are working. But of course, it brings a perfect excuse in to collapse all debt and get rid of debt and then say, well, here, everybody, is your new currency, the one world dollar, or whatever you want to call it, with Bush's, not Bush's, Trump's picture on the dollars, or
well, it's a funny Freudian slip there, Ben. Ben.
That's another Freudian slip.
It's because I was thinking about Ben Emlyn Jones, Neil. It's funny you said Bush. I mean, what did Daddy Bush say in 1991? What we really need is a new world order. And he said that, and if we get there, and we will do, then the world will be a much better place with a new world order. It's weird how they kind of they plan ahead, isn't it? Because he probably knew full well that he would be dead by the time this would be implemented, and yet he still went ahead with it. So I wonder if he thinks he's going to be reincarnated back into a body to be again another part of the Illuminati.
Oh, blimey, God forbid. We won't recognise him. He'll have his mask on. I can see why they wear these hoods now. They just pull the hood further over. They cough into their hood now. Anyway, so we won't be talking about coronavirus too much, hopefully. I'm sure we'll cover it again slightly in the show, but you probably heard a bit of a chuckle there in the background. I was quoting about my bra styles and my mask styles, because we have a guest, and that's Maria Wheatley, who's joining us from Wiltshire, and she just managed to get out of the coronavirus of Egypt just in the nick of time. Welcome to the show, Maria, because you're going to be talking about Avebury, amongst other things, and stone circles and ancient megalithic sites, and you were out in Egypt just as this thing was breaking. So welcome to the show. What exactly happened?
Well, no, Kerry and I had to cancel just before.
Oh, you never actually got there.
We never got there. But yeah, it was, people were pulling out, quite rightly so. Nobody really wanted to travel. So yeah.
Okay, well, glad you kind of just saved from the brink there, really, because it's not the best place to be, I'd imagine,
No.
this kind of coronavirus. I mean, I went to India when was it, 2018, I think it was. And I'm just thinking about what it's like there now. You know, like there's people in shanty towns and all sorts of things, and there's very difficult to keep social distance and with the population of India, and they're all kind of on top of each other, a bit like China, I'd imagine. So I feel sad for the people that we actually went and stayed with their nice bed and breakfast out there, because it's just like an empty beach from what it was a couple of years ago. Anyway, the subject is not myself in India. We're talking about you and your experiences and your research. So in a nutshell, do you want to tell our audience what your expertise is?
Well, I'm an author. I'm a research author on earth energies, ley lines, ancient sites worldwide. And that's my speciality. And I'm a dowser. I'm a second generation dowser. So I really love to interact with the energies of the site. And I also, in my research, discovered around the Stonehenge environs and elsewhere across the British Isles and Europe, a very long-skulled civilization. And I was the first to discover them around Stonehenge. And I really think a lot of that information was repressed, actually, by the universities. So, in a nutshell, I'm into the ancient civilizations, I'm into earth energies and ancient sites as well.
Wow, where do we start? I mean, so, Andy, questions?
Maria, I think I've seen you at the High Elms Manor, either last year or maybe the year before. Very interesting talks. It's doing those kind of talks, or not doing them, but rather going to them. It's so much information in such a short frame of time. So when you've seen 3 lots of kind of 2-hour presentations by each speaker, when you get to the 4th one, I think you might have been at the end, my mind was already quite frazzled, so it was quite a lot to take in.
It is at any conference, that's right, you kind of can only take in so much information at any one time, and Kerry's is quite fast paced, isn't it?
Yeah, but it really was fascinating. And kind of putting on the conspiracy hat slightly, Maria, why don't you think the really important stuff is actually, I mean, I know the answer anyway, but what your take is, I don't know. Why is it not taught to people? Why is it not taught in schools? Why, when we see programs on BBC, etc., they don't get into the nitty gritty of it? They only give us the superficial stuff.
Well, really, ever since about the 1950s, and you've had, professors like Professor Richard Atkinson, they made a model of what the ancient world was like. And it is just a model. And this is what Stonehenge looks like, and this is how the ancients dressed, and this is how they were. And normally they're portrayed as being quite barbaric, with scruffy hair and wearing terrible clothes and that sort of thing. But that is so far from the truth. And they knew that at the time. You found it extensive textiles in graves as part of grave goods, and it's a model that has been bandied around since the 1950s, and it continues. And it's like anything else on the internet as well. Say something enough times and it becomes a truth, and nobody questions the professor that did it. That's the problem, I think, in mainstream archaeology. Although there's younger archaeologists coming up the ranks now that are saying, really? That's what Stonehenge looks like? Really? Well, Atkinson changed things around to fit his model. And that is not really good research. You go with what the research says it is. And I think Stonehenge looked a little bit different to what that professor said. And that's going to be in my next book about what Stonehenge really looked like.
Wasn't it erected or re-erected at the turn of the 20th century? Because it was all the stones fallen down.
No, all of the stones are falling down. The most damaged part was in the southwest. The northeast part was quite intact, and it started in about sort of 1901 with Professor Gowland, and then in the 50s was the big program under the direction of Professor Atkinson and Professor Stuart Piggott. And one of the stones that they raised, it was an interesting story because I inherited all the unpublished surveys of a master dowser called Guy Underwood, and Guy Underwood happened to be there when the stone was being raised by Professor Richard Atkinson. And he thought it shouldn't have lent. You get leaning stones at stone circles, and they're quite common. Anyway, they got the cranes. You can imagine it. They're hauling. Stone number 60, it's called. Stone number 60 up straight. It let out this really strange scream noise that like a sound came out of it. And Professor Atkinson must have had that oh no moment, because there was a crack in the bottom that went right the way through to the top of the stone, and it nearly split the stone in two. So they had to quickly infill it with concrete. And if you look very carefully at Stonehenge, you'll see one whose base is completely full of concrete. And that's because I think it was supposed to have bowed to sacred space, like a lot of stones do. Avebury has a bow in stone. Boscawen On has a bow in stone. So, yeah, I think that they witnessed that very strange noise coming out of a stone.
Yeah, because I have actually, because I think it's a little known fact, whether they still do that now, and of course now we can't even do anything, but when things were open to the public and the public would go around Stonehenge and take all their pictures from a certain kind of distance, I think it's either before sunrise or after sunrise or before they're open, something like that. You're allowed to go in there as a group of up to 25 people. So whether they're still doing that before the coronavirus.
30 now. It's up to 30 now.
And I remember being allowed in, and of course they bring the security guard over because they don't want you to run around naked and things like that. You know, they've had people doing that before, and I said, look,
I told you about that before.
Yeah, I said to the security guard, look, I have changed my ways now.
You and your bra and masks now.
Yeah, I know. The old fertility thing coming out there, you see. So basically, I was looking at a lot of these stones. A lot of people that I was with, it was a pagan group. We went down in a minibus, and a lot of people doing their worshiping and chanting, and I'm not really a pagan, although I hung around with those people because we had interesting discussions. So I was chatting actually a lot to the security guard, who's pointing out all these very interesting things about where people used to chip away at the stones in the past to go and build their houses. They were given permission by the local vicar in the area, and so they had to literally prop these stones up with bits of concrete and things to keep them upright. So I thought it was quite fascinating stories. Now you talk about lifting up the stone. I remember also going to Avebury, which is about 30 miles north of Stonehenge, if I'm correct.
17 miles
17,
north.
okay. And there's a stone there, which I think they bring the stones up in the Middle Ages, a lot of them, and there's like a barber stone, it's called.
Oh, that's just a nonsense, that Barber Stone story. It really is, because for one, Professor, it was the archaeologist Alexander Keeler that did most of the reconstruction at Avebury, and they called it the Barber Stone because they found the skull and some of the bones of a skeleton that had been kind of put in the hole. And they found with it a pair of scissors, some coins, and some little artifacts. So they presumed he was a barber because he had scissors. More than likely, he was an itinerary worker that was a tailor. Now, a friend of mine called John Druce, who's also an author, realized that the dating of the coin could really determine what had happened. And it was at the time of the Black Death. You must realize when that person was put in that barber, that the barber was put in that hole, that stone hole, because the stone was kind of leaning away. It was a Catholic community, and you wouldn't have a burial that didn't give you your death rights. So he thinks that this person got the Black Death, and they were literally shoved into this hole and not given a proper Catholic burial, because that's again very usual. And he had money on him. He had silver scissors. Why weren't they taken by the local community? So I think he was probably the carrier of the Black Death to Avebury.
Oh, that's interesting, because the way it was explained to me, all the way I interpret it, is that they were erecting the stones in the Middle Ages to try and get them upright.
And that's wrong.
This was one of the barber. He was a barber. So someone said he had a pair of glasses or something.
No, that's completely wrong. Yeah. I'm sorry, but they did not erect. They did not erect any stones in the Middle Ages, categorically. Yeah. They did not do that until the 1930s, when Alexander Keeler had the equipment to do so. What they did do in the Middle Ages at Avebury is, for some reason, in particular sectors, and they saved the stones, they buried them. They made like little graves for them and buried them underground. So when Alexander Keeler got there, he listened to an old saying in my hometown of Marlborough, the stones of Avebury, they doth sleep and they doth lie. So he got a sounding bar, banged on the ground in that sector where the Barber Stone is, and realized they were buried. And he raised them after 500 years of being in complete darkness. So whoever told you that story is no historian of Avebury.
I can't remember that I read it or heard it or saw
Was it
it
a
in a
leprechaun down
plaque.
the pub again, Neil?
It could have been
That's
one
in
of
the
those
Red
heavy
Lion,
nights
isn't
again.
it?
Got a story
One of those
for
heavy
you.
nights, yeah. So you said you found these large skulls at Stonehenge. Is that right? So, and you're the person that discovered them.
Yeah, well, it was just outside of the Stonehenge environs, where you have the largest long barrow in Northwest Europe. And I was using Dowsing to get me to discover something in Stonehenge, but I didn't know what it was going to be or anything. I was just kind of playing around with some ideas, you know. And anyway, using this Dowsing technique, I found this long barrow and I thought I'd investigate it. Why is it the largest long barrow in Northwest Europe? So I investigated it. And then normally in a long barrow, incidentally, like West Kennet Long Barrow and many others, you have lots of burials. They're communal burial deposits. So you could have up to 36, some even 100. So I thought, wow, this is going to contain hundreds of people of the Stonehenge Phase 1 era. But it didn't. It was raised for just one woman. And that's very, very, very unusual. It's unprecedented in the Neolithic ritual landscape. And so I investigated that, found that the skull was then in Cambridge, and asked if I could view it, because I study archaeology. You can't just go into Cambridge, knock on the door and say, can I see a skull? You have to have a reason and a paper or something. It's very old school. And then I went in just to see this woman, and then she had this very, very long skull. And suddenly I thought, this is very unusual. It's not like our skull. And it was very lengthwise here, going this way. So then I investigated all the other barrows around Stonehenge, and lo and behold, the early antiquarians and the research coming out of catalogues in Cambridge and elsewhere said they were all long-skulled. Then there was I think they were a different race of human beings of the British Isles.
So you don't think there might be like an ET connection?
Probably not, because there is a researcher into the Paracas skulls of Peru. They're more cone heads. You know, they kind of go up rather than long, called Brian Forrester. He's very famous. And a friend of his, commissioned a whole load of DNA sampling. And it seems that they came from like the Russian end of things on the steppes. Through their DNA. But there is some very unusual burials in the Stonehenge landscape that I'll come to that could well be an alien description. It is just really wild.
Oh, go for it. We can't wait.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's find it. I'm going to read it out because it's verbatim of what an antiquarian saw. Okay. So you got to imagine that these antiquarians of the 19th century were very used to knowing if a burial mound had been disturbed. Yeah, and they knew if something was pristine. They weren't stupid people. They were quite scholarly type. And he said the bones were in a high state of preservation. And it seems that he had no forehead and his eye sockets were on the top of his head. His skin looked strange. There was other people around him. And the tip of his spine was a termination that looked like an animal that made us think it was no human, but an animal of the Lord's estate. So he's describing someone with no forehead, eyes on top of the head, and a tail. And that's they went into great detail to tell you at what level that was in the mound, because you can get a second burial deposit, and it was right at the bottom. And that's the strangest burial I've ever heard of.
So where do you think these species or these types of humans, where did they go?
That's a really good question, Andy, because What I noticed in the Stonehenge environs was a lot of them had been murdered. They all showed what's called a wound to the head or the back of the head. So clearly there was some kind of conflict, but that doesn't account for a whole society. It doesn't account. It will account for a small amount that were in the long barrows. So presumably, when the beaker culture in 2500 BC travelled from Europe, bringing a different culture with them.
Just explain who and what the beaker culture was again.
Right, you had ancient Britain was only made into an island in 6000 BC. Before then, it was on continental mainland Europe, and then you had the sea in 6000 BC. So you had the ancient Britons by themselves on this island. Yeah. Now, and they built monuments, they built long barrows, they built the first stone settings at ancient sites like Stonehenge and Avebury. Then, round about sort of 2500 BC, you had some immigrants coming across the sea called the beaker culture from Europe and from the Netherlands and from the Czech Republic, a kind of European base. They came to the British Isles and started building different monuments. And at that time, I think what could have happened, there may have been some kind of clash over the spiritual capital of Stonehenge and elsewhere, and hence the wounds. But just like the Spanish went to South America, they brought with them disease. And, the different types of, well, we've seen that with COVID now. They're saying that some types are more susceptible, aren't they, to the virus than other people are. So I think around that time, it could have been something like disease. But to be honest, Andy, even the archaeologists are speculating, nobody knows. And where are these people? This was a big culture raising some massive stones at Avebury long before the Bronze Age people built stone circles. They were building the first phases there, all disappeared apart from a few in long barrows. It's quite a mystery.
Do mainstream archaeologists and historians actually in any way attempt to kind of address this, or is it really lift up the carpet, sweep it underneath, never mention it again?
Absolutely. I mean, when I bought, I'm writing, well, nearly finishing now because of lockdown, a book all about this culture and the earth energies and stuff. And I do study with archaeologist Lisa Brown at Oxford, and it's just like they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. And you could present all of the evidence together and say this is the facts, and still they don't want anything to challenge their old model. That's the problem. And until these people go and you get a new influx in, I think it's the same old story. But there's not enough evidence. Yes, there is. There's skulls. Yes, there is. There's antiquarian reports. Yes, there is. There's so many things that can prove it, but they don't want to. And also, it would have to question our history. It would have to question, where did these people go? Let's get a DNA sample. I have a backer. He's a very wealthy backer that said he would pay for a DNA sample on the female skull and on other skulls. And basically, I got the door slammed in my face.
Who slams the door in your face? The DNA testing people, or people
that are... the people that are what's called the curator of the museum that's in charge of the collection of skulls.
I think take away the name curator and put in gatekeeper.
I absolutely. I mean, I'm totally for that. And I think it is repressing information, because even when I noticed how some of the antiquarians drew the skulls, I've been working with an artist recently, and you've got an Oxford paper, and it said this was the measurements of the skull, all very accurate, all done in, very detailed. And this is what the skull looks like. So I thought, well, doesn't look too long skull to me. I'll get somebody that's very used to this type of artwork, going for measurements and things. And then they showed me what it looked like, and it's totally different to what was in that paper. So that was literally a lie. The skull was huge, very, very strange looking, yet they tried to make it look normal. So now why was that?
We discussed similar topics about 2 years ago now, Giants on Record with Hugh. You probably know him, don't you?
Hugh Newman. Yeah,
that's it.
I help him with his Avebury tour. I do when he brings
that's
people.
It. I knew you're connected with him. His mind slipped. I knew it's Hugh, but I just forgot his surname. So I mean, yeah, because we had a really good, interesting discussion about all the giants on record and things. Again, doors slammed. You're not allowed to know about this sort of thing. Sweep it under the carpet. And so now we're talking about elongated skulls that might be alternative history or other kind of humans or something like that. So as well as kind of like the human race, we're getting sort of mixed bags of all sorts of other people creeping into the record then.
Well, absolutely. And interestingly, with the thigh bone that was found with these elongated skulls, they were quite short. They weren't giants. They came later. The larger people around the area, they're much later than the ancient Britons. But they were very, very strong and robust. So again, it is a different history, and I think there was lots of different species at any one time. It's a bit like today. We're all very different people. We have different cultures, and we have different color skins and different hair types, etc. And I think in the ancient civilized world, that was the same. And there were these different pockets of people doing different types of monumental building programs. But just like, Hugh has found, and I have found, you just want to ask a question and suddenly, bang, it gets close. They let me see the first skull, in all fairness, because I was writing a paper on the Neolithic, and then I was going to write another paper just to get in. Do you see what I mean? To get into my foot in the door, so to speak. And the next minute it was bang, no. You have to come up with a better paper. No. So each time I did anything, it was just no. Why do you want to see that skull? And also with these skulls, when I went to Cambridge, for example, and it's all in a very air-contained place, you've got gloves, you know the sort of thing. And it was literally like signing in. I had to sign in, and I looked at when this skull had last been seen. It was 1930.
Bloody hell.
They don't even know what they've got in their boxes because, honestly, Neil and Andy, if you imagine like you're in a big warehouse, like, I don't know, like Amazon has or something.
It's like Indiana Jones, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's stacked with boxes each side, labeled, the kind of astrological male or female sign. Right on my right-hand side was all Abydos. That's Egypt. That's a temple in Egypt. Very, very famous temple with a huge elder temple behind it that's much older called the Osiris. So they could have actually been from the Osiris rather than the Middle Kingdom temple. And on my left side was Stonehenge. And I spoke to one of the younger curators and I said, well, where have these boxes been catalogued? And she said, well, nobody really comes here. That's our top. It's a joke. That's our top universities.
Wow.
Okay. This isn't like a kind of I'm poodling around Avebury or the local Devizes Museum. Yeah. So I think there's going to be numerous finds if you could get your little mitts into those boxes.
Neil, who was that guest we had on that was talking about the Smithsonian having like giant skeletons?
That's Hugh, who we were just talking about.
It is,
yeah, Hugh Newman. Yeah,
because he said exactly the same thing about there's a party line, almost like a mantra, like a cult mantra, and anyone who goes against the party line is either destroyed, their reputation is destroyed, or they're got the door slammed in their faces. I mean, Maria, how are we going to battle against this? How are we, as people on the ground, so to speak, supposed to kind of fight against this mantra of, well, we know everything that there is. We know it's this kind of like, as David Icke says, and I don't know if you're a David Icke fan, he says, the everyone knows this, mate. Everyone knows that, mate. Of course they do. Is this kind of like philosophy or this mindset of this is how it is and you can't possibly question it. It drives me up the wall.
Exactly. I mean, that is their tune. Well, what my plan is, I'm studying. Well, the course got ended this year at Oxford, but I now have a doctor backing me, and we're going to come up with writing a good paper, and that will give me access to it. And also, I've been downloading some things when I was there that's given me access to papers. So I've got some some access to it, but it's the same old thing, like David Icke, Hugh and others say. We shouldn't be challenging the order. We should be listening to it. We shouldn't be the narrators of it. And so when you do discover something, that's it. The doors will start to close, because I can assure you, when I didn't say anything and I realized it was a long skull, oh, you couldn't be much nicer to me. Yeah, it was really nice. Even got a cup of tea. Yeah, so I mean, it was all very lovely, very lovely. And then everything changed when I mentioned that this is not a normal skull. And even the lady, who was really nice actually, that showed me the skull, she just looked at it and went. She had no idea. She looked more shocked than what I did.
Were they maybe? I mean. Perhaps trying to defend that shaped skull, saying, oh, it's a birth defect or something like that might have been common in those days because, they didn't have the proper medical knowledge or care, that kind of thing. Any kind of excuses that might have prevailed?
The excuses that are apparent are, one, it's been bandaged and it's been forced into an elongated shape. That's their main mantra. So it's not another species. It's us making our skulls longer, because when a child has a soft skull and you bind it and put boards against it, obviously you can manipulate the skull. And certain, cultures do that. But Brian Forrester, who researches the Paracas elongated skulls, who I'm now working with and will be doing tours with in the future, he had one of those eureka moments, and he found a female mummy that was pregnant with the fetus still intact, and the fetus had an elongated skull.
Oh, interesting.
That's very, very awkward.
Yeah, I mean, that is the eureka moment. You can't say that. And also with binding, it will leave evidence on the back of the skull. And the long-skulled people of Stonehenge show no apparent bandaging whatsoever.
So for people
And I think I've tracked down a child as well. My latest find is a child with a long skull.
Are there any resources online that people can really have a good look at these, or any videos where you can kind of show visuals on this at all?
I think Brian Forrester from Hidden Inca Tours, he's got a lot of very good information on there, and I've got articles on my website. But the problem is with the internet, I mean, there's one resource that has taken sort of my work and rewritten it, and they've got all the facts wrong. So that's the problem. Sometimes it's, great information out there, and we know this as researchers. I mean, you guys listen to everybody. You know that sometimes things can get very twisted down the line. But I would say for look into Brian Forrester. He is the leading world's authority on elongated skulls, and who admires my work, and obviously I admire his. And as for online, this is another thing about the whether it's Hugh's giants or whether it's my long skulls, you find you hit a wall on the internet. You could even go to Google Scholar. Yeah, that's the resource where you'd go to if you wanted to find out what's in Cambridge catalogues. You wouldn't go to Google. Normally, you go to Google Scholar. And if you went to somewhere like Google Scholar, again, it will give you a few little articles, but not the kind of main meat of it. And that's repressed information, I feel.
This is remind me a bit of Lloyd Pye's Star Child skull, the kind of battles he had, and Wikipedia kind of stitching him up left, right, and centre, trying to explain the facts of his case and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that was, for those that don't know, check out Lloyd Pye, the Star Child skull, and I think it's now under the care of the person that found it. I can't remember, or no, not found it, was owned it, should I say, because it was discovered by a girl in a cave, I think in Mexico, back in the 1930s. and I think the rest of the bones were washed away, but it was a small skull. Lots of people thought it was a birth defect, but other people seem to think that it's got DNA that's not human in some way, suggesting it could be part alien or something like that. So that's interesting. Now, you said about dowsing earlier. I'm kind of interested in that. That's working with ley lines as well, is it?
Ley lines and earth energies and grid lines and underground water that emits very mysterious patterns. But just before we move on to that, just to end about the long skulls, that what I read to you about that very strange being that had the eyes on top of the head, no forehead and a tail, if you looked for that long barrow, which is about 2 miles from Stonehenge, it's not even on an OS map.
I think I've been in that one. If it's the one I'm thinking of, is it? Oh God, it's near a road, isn't it? It's not.
No, this is. You have to walk right from Stonehenge, quite a distance, right across Normanton down, until you get to what's called Lake Group Barrows, and all of them. You could get an OS map. You could look at all of those barrows. They're all on there except for that one.
Interesting.
And the reason why I knew it was there in the first place is because I was on another course with Bath University with an archaeologist who showed me that barrow. And I said, well, what's inside it? Well, I don't know. So I just looked at what is inside it then? And that's where I found that.
Wow. And do they now mark it on maps?
No, it's not on an OS map. And why is that?
Yeah. So have you tried looking like from Google Earth down on the whole area to see if there's other things that are not marked?
I bet they blank out.
Possibly they do.
That's a really good suggestion, Neil. But in all honesty, no, I haven't done that. But it's certainly a good suggestion to try and, match things to the landscape to an OS map.
Or buy a nice expensive drone and fly it over with a good HD camera. And you could sell maps to all these Indiana Jones types,
Well, can't people kind of like link things and tag things on Google anyway? Like pubs and restaurants are kind of mapped on Google, and people can kind of add their own things, from what I can understand.
Yeah, I mean, in the Stonehenge environs, every now and again, the military, and this is where Google Earth isn't always that accurate, because they can change the coordinates. Because you don't want missiles coming into the Salisbury Plain, to the military. So you'll notice that even when you're on the Salisbury Plain, and I know it quite well, and you're trying to find something, suddenly you'll think, well, that's not there. And it's because, I think it's because it's all military. You must remember Stonehenge is surrounded by military establishment after military establishment, up to 16, including Portendown, where they make viruses.
Yeah.
That's on the main lay that links to Stonehenge.
Now, why would they put all those military bases and things around that area? Is it just because they got lots of training ground, or could there be another aspect to it that they can safely secure places that they don't want the public to get to? I.e., yes, it's a training ground, but there's a nice stone barrow there that they don't want people to look at.
I think there's a military base around Stonehenge, because I did a program once with the UFO hunters from America, and it was about vortexes. That was their theme. And I was their dowser and talking about Stonehenge and the ancient repressed history. And they said one thing: wherever you get an ancient site, you get a vortex, you get military. Yeah. And whether that's Sedona, whether that's anywhere, and they were saying example after example. So I would say, I think, these are power centers. You have lots of geological anomalies at ancient sites. That's without the earth energies and things. All stone circles within the British Isles are never more than 1.5 miles away from a fault line. All of them. Yeah, that has been noticed for some time, because when the sun or the moon crosses a horizon line at sunrise or moonrise or sunset, it gives a kind of ripple effect in the land that causes a stone sited near it to be bathed in piezoelectrical activity. So the ancients were very aware of all the geology in the area. And when you think about that, well, how did they know there was a fault line there?
So yeah, so the interesting thing then with the vortexes and military bases and things like that, then, because there's what's that town now? It's a military town. They had it well known in the 60s for UFO sightings.
Warminster.
Warminster thing. That's it.
The Warminster thing.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Warminster is in the southwest of the UK. And back in the 60s and early 70s, I can't remember when it's kind of stopped. I think there's probably still things going on there now, maybe. There is a military base there, but there's lots of things being seen in the sky there. And it became known as a Warminster thing. And it got so kind of heavy, shall we say, that even people from the local town who weren't into those things were all assembling into town halls to sort of demand answers. And I think they even dispatched Patrick Moore on one occasion to go down there and try and explain things, which would have been a laugh.
Very curious. Very curious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there does seem to be lots of sightings of UFOs around stone circles, or is that just because it's more open and you can see them? And is there, I mean, when you said you was working with the UFO hunters and things, did you kind of get the impression that is the case, that wherever there's these ancient sites that the UFOs are coming through vortexes? Is that the idea then?
The idea is, I mean, the vortex is a part of it, but yes, you have these military establishments, and Warminster is on the edge of the Salisbury Plain. From the crow flies, it's not that far from Stonehenge. It's right on the edge of the Salisbury Plain. And it was Arthur Shuttleworth that got all of those people there in the 70s. And he said he saw a cattle teleport somewhere as well within one of his books. I've got one of his first edition books. But with the ancient sites, there was a fantastic researcher, an author, who wrote a book called UFOs in Reality. He was called Roy Dutton. And it's a fascinating book because what he did, he was a British aerospace engineer. And back in the 60s and the 70s, they had really good computers. I mean, we've got our laptops now and they're fantastic. So he put a whole load of data of where UFOs were seen up and down the British Isles, and where were they focusing on? And he came up in a nutshell with two corridors, one that went north and south up the British Isles, strangely so, and one that went east or west. Okay. Now, where they intersected, those two UFO corridors, was Stonehenge. Yeah. So it's not just about, they're going there. They seem to be on a flight path, according to Dutton's work, that's where they focus on. And numerous sightings have been around Stonehenge, very often of an amber shaped like lights. That's very commonly seen around Stonehenge. I've seen it myself. And I know a flare as well. I mean, that's the great thing about the Salisbury Plain, because the military are practicing and playing their war games, and you're traveling across the Salisbury Plain. Suddenly you'll see this massive light and people go, oh my God, what was that? And that is a flare. It can make it can make night go to day. I mean, that's how dramatic their massive flares are on there. But it seems very surreal, because it'll be for a few seconds and then it'll go back to darkness again. But the amber lights are different than that. They tend to be very, very focused and quite large.
It's interesting because they can use, if anyone does see a UFO in those parts, they can say, oh, it was a military exercise, we were firing up flares, and that's what they saw. So it provides a really convenient cover story, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But people know what they see. And, and they know that there's something strange or something has happened to them. In fact, people have had some missing time around Stonehenge. I know of two military personnel. They were parked not far from Stonehenge up on what's called Track 51. And they were having a couple of tinnies and smoking some cigarettes. They were off duty. Yeah. And they were just hanging out, because they were from Lark Hill, which is only about 1.5 miles away from Stonehenge. Well, anyway, they said they saw, and they told me this, they saw this amber light by the car. And then the next minute, the amber light was at the other end of the car. So they're trying to track where this light is coming from and going to. Anyway, it goes away. So they finish off their drink, and then they go back to base, and then they're instantly arrested. They've been out for 3 days and they haven't had, they thought they just had the couple of, tinnies. So I think these lights can be like, you said you're interested in fairies and things, the fae. Well, they can distort time as well, can't they? It's like you get on one timeline and then you're on another timeline. So I think, Stonehenge is the attractive of all of these different types of experiences. And it's a nexus of numerous ley lines and earth energies, which are like currents that entwine leys and are independent of ley lines. They're like veins in your body full of energy. They're called earth currents.
So when you're doing a dowsing, do you have a method to detect one over the other?
Well, in the way that I was taught dowsing, you recognize and interpret the energy through the pattern it emits. So, for example, underground water, which is easy to find, anyone can find underground water. I mean, it's so easy to do. You just need a twig as well. I mean, it's not rocket science, a twig and water. But anyway, that water will emit a pattern of like 3 wavy lines. Yeah, that's what underground water that is falling from the sky and it's filled up the underground streams and rivers. That's called groundwater officially by, Wessex Water would call it groundwater. Now, in other dowsing terms that go a little bit deeper, they say there's another type of water independent of rainfall. A geologist now would be going, what? What? But anyway, in esoteric dowsing terms, there's another type of water. It's generated by the earth itself, chemically produced within the earth, and emits a spiral pattern. And it's like a big lake, a big aquifer. So if you hit a spiral pattern, then that's a very, very special type of water generated chemically within the earth. And that's what the ancients were looking for. And they were putting their stone circles above these spiral patterns, which numerous dowsers have confirmed, master dowsers to boot. So I look for the pattern and I can interpret the pattern of that. So I've done water divine in my life. I don't do it now, but I've been very successful at well boring. And I know I would go for the groundwater for that. So I think that when we've measured these energy fields, because I've got a team that works with me that aren't into dowsing and quite skeptical, and they say, okay, we're going to take measurements here. And what we have found is that it emits a strong ion field. It increases the negative ions and depletes the positive ions. And that's very good for you, the negative ions. And then when we looked into electrostatic fields, for example, I don't know if you guys have been to Silbury Hill near Avebury.
Yeah.
It's on my to-do list, definitely.
Yes, it's the largest man-made mound in northwest Europe. There are bigger mounds worldwide, but it was originally chalk white. Imagine a gleaming white, massive chalk mound. A bit like the pyramids in Giza were coated off in limestone, weren't they? Gleaming white. And when we did some tests on the top, the electrostatic field was 1,000 times greater than the bottom control area. So it's changing the whole electrostatic fields around them, these ancient sites as well. So they change the ion field, they emit electromagnetic energy, electrostatic energy, and the ancient ancestors were looking for all of that and placing monuments upon them.
What for? Wi-Fi or?
Wi-Fi. Well, you see, what I discovered was that if you have a standing stone rooted into earth energy, now it could be an earth current, spiral pattern, whatever, ley line, you choose what you want. When you put the stone into that, it seems to them behave in a particular manner, where if you imagine a standing stone is above ground and part of it is below ground, correct? Because it's rooted into the chalk bedrock.
Stabilize it, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and in Wiltshire, they're not in the earth, they're in solid chalk bedrock. Okay, so they got big socket holes. And then when we tested it, because dowsers have always said, myself included, that if you take a dowsing rod from the bottom to the top, it will react in certain places, like it's got an energy band. So Rodney Hale, who's worked with other authors like Andrew Collins and others besides, came with me to Avebury, and we chose a stone that was in situ. That means it hasn't been re-erected and set in concrete. It's as it was 4,500 years ago. So the one that was in situ, he put the radio signals up and was trying to get electromagnetic signals. And exactly at those dowsable points, he was getting a huge electromagnetic signal. So what I think is going on, you put the standing stone into the ground, into the energy system, and it probably in its crystal lattice structure is beaming out particular electromagnetic frequencies that you can pick up with the right equipment and beaming it across the landscape. And that is kind of Wi-Fi. There's no wires there, and you've got an electromagnetic signal going across the land, and the equipment says that is happening.
So, okay, if there's a signal going across the land, is that getting then picked up by other stone circles, like a network or some sort?
Exactly. You're bang on. That's right. There's one particular band that's quite close to the top that then beams over to the next stone. And we tested that out at Rollright because Rollright has an outlying stone 6 miles away on Spelsbury Down, and we picked the signal up there. Then the lower bands, as they're called down the bottom, seem to be putting the signal to the next stone in the stone circle. So there's a lot going on at a stone circle that you can't see at all. You can't hear because it's what's called infrasound. It's below 20 hertz, so you can't hear it. And other scientists that have looked into the Rollright Stone Circle in Oxfordshire, for example, the Dragon Project, as they were called back then in the late 70s and 80s, they picked up ultrasound. Now, these stones were releasing ultrasound, not inside the stone circle. That was quiet, but it was like pushing it out into the landscape, all the ultrasound. And that was tested time and time again. And certain magnetic anomalies would appear on the stone. And I had the good fortune last year of being with Patrick Stewart, from Star Trek. At Rollright Stone, showing him these energies. Very open-minded.
Wow. So he took the whole idea, you explained all the theories to him, and he was really sort of, wow.
Make it so.
So, make it so, number one. Yeah. So, we do a whole host of voices on this show. Me and Andy, well,
We're terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, they can communicate with other stone circles, and the Rollright, to my knowledge, unless you can correct me, Maria, is the stone circle that's the furthest east in the UK, because most of them tend to be in the southwest or Wales. So you got them in Cornwall. That's just for those that are outside of the UK. Cornwall is on the southwest of the UK, and then we've got the southwest counties like Dorset and Somerset, then we got the Welsh border going over to Bristol, up to Wales. There's stone circles there. There's also some up in Cumbria, and also some right in through Scotland, also to Orkney, possibly some up in the Shetland Islands. But there's none on East Anglia. Is that correct?
Well, they had more timber structures because prior to the megalithic building program, if you go back even earlier to what you see as the standing stone circles, there were timber structures, and then they were replaced. And East Anglia, they tended to work more with like timber and wood that obviously rots. But we have 900 surviving stone circles in the British Isles. But we must remember that so many were demolished. I mean, just 7 miles up the road from Avebury-Henge, for example, there was a wonderful temple called the Temple of Venus, coined by an antiquarian, beautiful concentric circle. Only one stone survives now. A lot of them got destroyed in the 1700s for building material, and shamefully so for road rubble. So I think there would be lots more. And just south of Avebury, on private land, there are more stone circles that nobody knows about because it's on private land and the farmer doesn't want tourists there.
So we still don't know why they're sending out the signals, though. I mean, does anyone put any theories of what they're sending out this frequency? But what would be the benefit of all those man hours that's putting all those stone circles up to get that frequency? They must be getting something back from it.
I think they're multifaceted stone circles. I don't think they're for any one thing. Okay. Now, one example of another researcher whose work I've extended, he's called John Burke. He wrote a fantastic book, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. And in his research, he found if you put seed, and the old type of seed that the ancient Britons would have used is called ember wheat. Mm-hmm. We don't have it now. It's all been manipulated, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, back in the day, they had ember wheat. And he found that you get these electrical currents in earth currents or tolerant currents. And they generate this kind of electrical frequency that if you put grain upon, like at the center of Avebury has pits, and they're marked in a kind of ovid shape. And they did contain seeds. The evidence was there. And what he did, Burke, he took them back to his laboratory, charged them up, if you will, on these energy points. He wouldn't have called them energy points. He would have just taken them to the center. I'm saying they're the energetic spiral point. Then he grew them in a laboratory, and he found they grew twice as fast and twice as healthy than the control group. And he did that. The pyramids in Mexico, he did it everywhere. So on one level, you can enhance agriculture by having a stone circle or a mound, for example. Then on another level, I think you are in an altered state of consciousness when you're in a stone circle. People might not think they are when they go around a monument, whether it's Abydos in Egypt or wherever. It does change your consciousness. And if you stay in that energy zone for long enough, you do feel slightly different than when you leave to when you arrived. Some of the stones always have been associated in legend to be healing stones. Geoffrey of Monmouth, the 12th century chronicler, said about Stonehenge, for example, there is not one stone that does not heal. And then you have very famous stones in Gloucestershire, like the Mitchenhampton Long Stone, that has a hole in the bottom where you could put your leg through or your arm through. And people used to say it cured children of rickets. And so they have a kind of healing side to them that has always been noted through legend and folklore. And sometimes, as you probably know in your own research, Neil, when it comes to like the folklore, they do contain sometimes grains of truth. Sometimes they are just a story, but sometimes they're a holy history handed down through generation after generation.
You got to wonder. I mean, a lot of people are very much into crystals and crystal healing and that kind of thing. How on earth did they first find out about it, or even go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. Well, what I find fascinating is that you got a whole load of people say in the southwest in Cornwall, and you got a whole load of people say further up 300 or 400 miles, say in the middle of Wales, and you got people right up in the Orkney Islands also building stone circles, all to kind of similar plans. And yet these people weren't in contact with each other.
But they were actually, because the latest information coming out from UCL, University College London, who they test on what's called like things like isotopes in your teeth, and they can tell I've got some apple juice in there, but they could tell what was in a container through the evidence behind. And they found that the people of Orkney were bringing their cattle and produce all the way down to Durrington Walls near Stonehenge, and people were mixing far more. Now, if you carried on from Stonehenge in near enough a straight line, you hit what's called Christchurch on the Dorset coastline, and they have found a huge, ancient, probably Neolithic harbour there. We were trading. I mean, you find in Bronze Age round barrows beads from Egypt, amber from Estonia, jet for Wheatley Bay. So you were having your local trade as well. But yeah, for much further afield, Stonehenge and Avebury, they were cosmopolitan places where people gathered to. And the isotopes of one burial, the Amesbury Archer, that showed that he was from Germany.
Interesting. So really there's a bigger network out there, and they're presumably passing on their plans of why don't you build this stone circle in your town? Because we found it's really great for healing, and the porridge tastes great. Well, okay. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to take a break now. We're talking to Maria Wheatley about stone circles at Neolithic Britain and the healing properties and UFOs and all sorts of strange things, including weird skulls. And I'm sure we can move on to a whole host of other things in part 2. So for the moment, ladies and gents, get yourself a cup of tea and get settled in for part 2 of the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
This is Barry Fitzgerald from Ghost Hunters International. In my book, In the Mist of Gods, I explore the world of the fairies or fae. This is not the whimsical winged creatures romanticized in modern literature and popular culture, but old-world, intelligent, and sometimes dangerous beings hidden in the tunnels, mounds, and raths in countries all over the world. Known by many names, the fae coexist with mankind and at times come in direct contact with unsuspecting people whose lives are changed forever. In the Mist of Gods is a powerful book that chronicles my years of research into the enigma and legend of the fairy and examines their metamorphosis into the modern-day extraterrestrial phenomenon. In the Mist of Gods is available in both softcover and Kindle format on Amazon and on glenandtea.com.
Oh, come in, sit down, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hi folks, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, guest Maria Wheatley and Neil Geddes-Ward, who has hopefully come back from his Ann Summers crusade, finding masks and bras and whatever else he's wearing for the coronavirus.
I'm comfortably back.
You're not wearing it today, unfortunately, Neil. I think it would look better if you did.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Nice little frilly kind of pink number would be fantastic. So Maria, moving swiftly on, there's so much we could kind of go into now, but we're talking about early on in the show about the paranormal instances that you've had. So you mentioned the amber light being shown that above Stonehenge. Interestingly, I've heard a lot of kind of amber light sightings. A lot of people kind of think Chinese lanterns and things like that, which some of them might be, but you can kind of usually tell between a Chinese lantern and an actual strange light anomaly. Have you had anything else of a paranormal freaky nature happen?
Yes, there was one time at Avebury Henge, going back about 15 years ago now, I suppose, where I used to do tours, well, still do, with children. I love taking children around ancient sites to teach them about Dowsing and energies. They're so receptive and they're great fun. And anyway, it was on a day where it was quite wet and there was like a summer storm brewing in the background. And it was raining so hard. I was stood at the center of the southern circle and the rain was just dripping off my nose. And I was about to lose the will of wait because these people were late. But the kids came running over to me and they were saying, Maria, come on, come on. And they were very excitable. And even the teachers were doing this for me to go into the next sector. So I went running over and the stones were literally releasing this very strange low humming sound. Now, intuitively, all of us didn't touch the stones. You think that's probably what you would do, but we didn't. And then it seemed to just all disappear. And then it went back to the normal sound. But I was in another sector by a stone circle and there was no sounds being released from the stones. So I think it could have been the atmospherics at the time. It was on the verge of a thunderstorm. Maybe that had something to do with it. But the kids were then going to me the following day at Stonehenge and they said, do the stones sing at Stonehenge as well, Maria? I said, I think we've just witnessed an amazing experience that you might not ever witness again. I certainly haven't. And I've gone over to Avebury on the verge of a thunderstorm because I don't live that far from Avebury. Never heard it since.
Now, interesting you talk about the children there. When did this interest in stone circles and ancient monuments come about with you? Was you a child when you first kind of got interested in it, or was it a bit later on?
Well, my dad, he was very much into ancient sites, earth mysteries. It was John Martineau from Wooden Books gave him all of the unpublished surveys of a master dowser. He looked into that. He himself was very much into dowsing and things. So I kind of just loved ancient sites, and I've always loved history anyway. And I decided to follow in his footsteps, so to speak. But I also wanted to study formally archaeology so I could argue the archaeological language back. Hasn't actually got me anywhere at the moment, except a headache. But so I kind of combined what the Orthodox people say, and then I challenge that, because unless you know their narrative and how you can go back, you're kind of, out on a limb. So I combined archaeology with earth mysteries and dowsing and paranormal experiences.
So with the dowsing and things like that, I mean, how do mainstream archaeology take that? Because you said it's very easy to douse for water, and anyone can do it. So surely a lot of these mainstream archaeologists must have kind of heard of this idea and maybe tried it themselves and have to agree that that is the case.
Back in the 1930s, the main curator of the British Museum, Reginald Smith, he was a dowser. Tom Lethbridge, an archaeologist from Cambridge, he was a dowser. Now, it seemed to be more respectable then, because you didn't have a lot of stuff put on it. It was, this is what it is. This is going for underground water. This is going for energy. It wasn't necessarily the kind of new age bent on it, if you see what I mean. So they took it quite seriously. So yes, some of the top archaeologists were dowsers, and it's not like that now. It's not like that now by any means of the imagination, but some, people are interested. I remember on one Channel 4 program that I was invited to appear on with Tony Robertson, walking through history, through Stonehenge, although none of the team do much walking. But anyway, it was quite funny. But we were on top of a site called Adam's Grave, and Tony Robertson didn't want any talking about it. He just wanted to go live with the dowsing rods and see if he could get this ley line that I said was flowing somewhere through the monument. So he didn't really have a clue. Do you see what I mean? I didn't sort of give a demo or anything before. And so the camera's rolling now. He's talking to me on camera, and I thought this is either going to go very, very good or it's going to go very, very bad. Yeah. But anyway, he had the rods in his hand, and then he moved forward, and it was one of those fantastic moments. The rods crossed exactly, very powerfully, and he just looked at camera and said, "I didn't do anything." And then from that moment on, he said, "I'm very open-minded to that." So if somebody has an experience with it and they can say, "I didn't move them," do you know what I mean? "I didn't do that," then they become a little bit more open-minded. Prior to that, it's a load of rubbish. You've moved them. You've done that. I saw you do it, when you're thinking, well, really?
Now, Andy, you must have done this in psychic workshops and circles where I'm sure maybe it was the same psychic workshop I met you at, where we had to douse people's auras. Do you recollect that?
Vaguely, it was many years ago. It's probably about 15 years ago.
Really? No, I haven't known you that long, surely.
I think it is,
Really?
I think it was around about, I think it was around about 2005-ish. I could be wrong. It might have been a bit later.
No, 2010, 2009, 2010. Yeah, I was in Orkney. I lived in the Orkney Isles. That's why I mentioned, Maria, that I know
love
about
Orkney.
Yeah, and I go up there 2 or 3 times a year if I can. My children still live there. They've grown up there, so I know quite a few of the stone monuments and circles, like the Ring of Brodgar being famous, the Stones of Stennis, etc., etc.
Oh, that's lovely.
Never been in the Tomb of the Eagles, but it's one of my things to try out. The Tomb of the Eagles. It's,
the Tomb of the Beagles is better than the Tomb of the Eagles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
I've been barking up the wrong stone circle.
Definitely that. Yeah, you just ask the local curator to get the key to unlock it. You can go in there. You can have private access. It would be my top tip to go there. But talking about aura dowsing, what you can do if you're at a stone circle is you can do the aura, douse the aura by just getting a rod or a pendulum and moving it away from the body. It's the easiest way to do it. There's lots of ways to douse it, but that's an easy way. And then say to the person, stand near a stone or stand on an earth current, then we'll measure your aura after that. So you've kind of interacted with the energy a bit, and instantly you notice it expands massively so. And same on some churches, on PowerPoints in Christian churches that were previously on pagan sites. And I used to do a lot of Knights Templar. We're not going to get the Knights Templar now because that's a whole thing other than stone circles. but I've decoded a lot of Church of the Knights Templar, and the local vicar of Avebury. I'm quite proud of this. I wear it like a little bit of a badge now, actually. But she's banned me from most of the churches around the Avebury area, including Avebury Church itself.
Awesome. That sounds exactly like religion, because the thing is, yes, churches are built on kind of high energy points, but if you think about what a church is built like, what do they have on top of their on the top of the towers? They have a huge spike, a very kind of what do you call it? Not a spike, spire. Brain's gone dead. A huge spire. So it's almost like they're taking the earth energy that's already there, using the power of prayer or the power of kind of like mass thought, and then channeling that up into a spire, up into, whatever. And as you know, kind of religions are, in my view, not really, well, it kind of depends who you talk to, but some churches might be quite spiritual, but some are very kind of fire and brimstone, especially in medieval times or pre-medieval, and it's almost kind of like channeling like a worship to a deity via prayer through these church spires using earth energy points. So and it's kind of like subverting it as well, or hijacking it like a parasite. So you got these earth energies that either pagans or druids or kind of like, native people that weren't religious were using. Along comes the religions, dumps their churches on top, hijacks the energy points, and then uses that energy to kind of channel energy to their god. What do you reckon to that kind of concept?
Well, for sure, they're on earth energies. Now, normally in a church, it's either dedicated to, for instance, Mary, Catherine, Vincent, Peter, and everybody else. So normally it's the gender is determined by the major earth current going down the axis line. So if you've got a female earth current going down the axis line, it's probably going to be dedicated to Mary Magdalene, Catherine, and so on. And if you've got a male line going down the axis line, then it's going to be dedicated to a male saint or, disciple. And if it's a mixture of the two, it tends to be something like All Saints. It's kind of combined in. So you can normally find out the gender of the place just by literally by its name.
So how do you know with these energies, one's female and one's male, and what importance is that?
Well, it was noticed many years ago, actually, by an author called Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, that you have a major ley line like that, and you have a female and a male current entwining it, a bit like a DNA strand or the caduceus symbol. And then you get much smaller earth currents, and they do seem to have, we're not talking about male or female as such, but imagine it more like solar or lunar. Yes, solar or lunar forces that are combined in these energies, and each one has a particular frequency as well. So it has like a high frequency or a low frequency. And I think, that's what the ancients were looking at. They were looking at a whole host of things. Is it a male? Is it a female? And also the earth, when we think about ley lines, we think about them as being like 2D in a way. It's a line on a bit of paper linking Glastonbury to Stonehenge. But if you imagine earth energy is, and to some regard, ley energy is rising out of the ground and coming up and kind of bathing you in that earth energy. And there was two Belgian professors and a German I think he was a physicist, actually, who looked at the Earth from a completely different point of view and said there's so many colors within the Earth, and Earth energies emit these color frequencies. Now, there was two French gentlemen called Chaplin and de Belizal, and they looked at the frequencies of the sun coming in, which we know has the colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. And they also said that they had these other colors, invisible colors like infrared, ultraviolet, and one very strange color that they called the negative green. And they said that the sun...
I've never heard of negative green. What's that about?
Yeah, well, this is weird, Andy. Anyway, so these are like scientists, Dowsing people. And so Chalmery was in a laboratory. He said this is a light frequency that has two waves, a horizontal wave and a vertical wave coming up like that. So he filled an object full of the negative green, this light frequency, and he was found 1 week later completely mummified in his laboratory. It went down in Dowsing history.
Rewind that a little bit. He was found completely mummified.
This is Harry Potter stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, no, this is true. You look at the French divine in legacy of these master dowsers, and that happened. As crazy as it sounds, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is what happened. And there was a dowser architect called Karim, who's now inherited those papers. So that's what they said comes out through the sun, all of these different color rays and frequencies, and the timing of these color frequencies dependent on the time of day. Yeah. So, for example, at dawn, you'd get more of a kind of violet color, and as the sun sets, you'd get a longer wave red. Now, the Belgium professor said the Earth does that as well on Earth energies. They have the Earth colors that come out of the ground because everything is has a kind of like frequency, and that when these two forces of Earth and light combined, that's what generates the most power. And the French diviners, looking at the colours of the sun, Chalmery and de Belizal, they said that's why a pyramid is built in a particular way, because it generates the negative green frequency of light. And you can have... Yes, and hence mummifications. And at the same time, the Earth is generating these frequencies, and you can have pockets of the negative green. It's quite rare. But at Rollright, for example, you do have a pocket of negative green. I mean, you're only going to go there very quickly and you get out. 15 seconds, that's enough with that type of frequency. And some of the early researchers said it's the cure and cause of cancer. Because it's like this parallel ray that's good, this vertical ray that's bad. And they looked at the chakras completely different to what people look at the chakras today. They say that you cannot isolate one color red. You can't isolate that color. It's the predominant color that comes through. So our chakras have all of the colors within them of the sun, but one dominates within its opening. So you could have the red for the base chakra and so on and so forth coming up the chakra system. And one master dowser, he claimed he could suspend the life force of snails. Now, I don't advocate animal testing, you know. I'm a vegan. I wear Lush products. You know, they're not tested on animals. But anyway, and they did this test, and he could suspend the life force. And he said that's how you could cure cancer, by suspending the life force, not cutting it out. I mean, the Western mindset is if you've got cancer, you've got to cut it out. You've got to take it away. They're saying, no, you suspend the life force.
So going back to this guy, I just that blindsided me a little bit. This guy that was mummified, remind me what his name was and what the year was of this.
About the 1940s, I think. It could have been the 1950s. He was called Chalmery and de Belizal.
And where would people go to kind of verify that? If people were like, that's a load of rubbish, let's, give me proof kind of thing. Where would they go to find that?
Well, there's a book written in French. Obviously, these were French people, and they wrote one big book, and it's something like Radiesthesia. And I've got the name of the book. I could drop that to you afterwards and show you the name of the book, but I honestly can't pronounce it or think what it's called offhand. So you had some dowsers believing in the colours of the sun and others believing in the colours of the earth. And that's what they were testing on. Then it seemed to go into more what's called psychic dowsing. From about the 1960s onwards, people then got a pendulum and asked the pendulum a question. That's psychic dowsing, information dowsing. But prior to that, you had a very learned scientific body looking into dowsing. And as many dowsers would say, if they're in their truth, I know I've got answers wrong with information dowsing before. There was one man that said, I have found he called it the X Factor, but now there's a big game show called the X Factor. I think that's lost its appeal there. But he called it the X Factor nonetheless, and said, I know the reason why dowsing goes wrong. And he was called Himmler. Now, when Hitler, I've got a fantastic archive picture of Hitler shaking hands with Himmler, congratulating him on his dowsing academy. Okay. Now, they were looking into dowsing for occult purposes, probably for the war movement purposes. And one of the first things Himmler did when he invaded Poland, he cordoned off the stone circles there, they're phonetically, they're sounding like Odry, Odry, stone circles. But Polish guy said, that's not how you pronounce it, Maria. And I've forgotten how you pronounce it properly. But Himmler cordoned all of that off to make it their occult dowsing shrine. Yeah. And so when the Allies were coming into the dowsing academy, they burnt it to the ground. And that came through to me from a German master dowser. And he gave me the cuttings of the newspaper about it all. And they used the earth currents in a very dark manner.
Well, of course, they were very much into the kind of the Vril society and this kind of Vril energy. Was it Vril energy, or was it? I think it was the Vril society with the Vril energy, and they had Himmler's castle was kind of like this occult, ritualistic kind of black sun worshipping place where they used to do all kinds of strange things, from what I can understand, like candle lit kind of ceremonies and things like that, and people holding flames. I know the Nazis were very much into flames, but this was very much like an occult, almost like a Knights Templar type setup, I understand.
That's right. The main headquarters of Himmler was in that castle, and it's on the crossing point of two currents, and one is called a red frequency of earth color, and the other is a white. That is in symbolism the colors of the warrior, the colors of life and the colors of death. And that is why it's suspected by master dowsers they changed the color of their flag to include white and red, because that's the frequencies of the earth that they were manipulating. And if you look to where they place some of their horrific, basically killing a lot of people, they tend to be on these particular negative frequencies. So they were looking into where to place things and using the earth currents to guide them to that in a very negative, little twisted way. I mean, obviously I wouldn't do that at home, folks.
Would you say that how would the Schumann resonance fit into all this? Is this what we're talking about, or is this something different?
The Schumann resonance is like a particular frequency, from about 7 hertz, and it's going up a little bit. You'll get the Schumann frequency anywhere on Earth. If you did an experiment now at Avebury at that frequency, you'd see a black line on a graph. Do you see what I mean? Because that's constantly there in the background is the Schumann resonance. These other frequencies and sounds are above or below the Schumann resonance, and some of them can be in like kilohertz as well, not just hertz frequency.
So in layman's terms, what is the Schumann resonance, and what is the earth energies that you're talking about, like the differences between them?
Yeah, the Schumann resonance, if you like, it's could be likened to the heartbeat of Gaia. It's everywhere on the planet. It's something emitted by the planet between, averagely speaking, between 7 and 11 hertz. That's the frequency of that. So that's everywhere. I could be anywhere and everywhere. But the other types of earth energies and their frequencies, they're independent of the Schumann resonance, and they could be higher than that in a kilohertz frequency or lower than that. And they, like I said earlier, they tend to be associated, the deep underground water, with a lot of release of ions as well. And these frequencies tend to be electromagnetic. And we did a wonderful experiment at Avebury once. You wouldn't get away with it now with tourists. You know, you'd have English Heritage and the National Mistrust dragging us into one of their Land Rovers in their green shirts or something. I can see it all now. But what we did with Rodney Hale, very ingenious man, we got some huge copper probes and put them right into the earth energy, but did a control as well. Otherwise, it's a nonsense. You know, you have to have a control to see if there's an anomaly. And I thought I'd have the great idea of putting it on the crossing joining point of the Mary and Michael, male and female currents at Avebury, and it blew the equipment. So I thought maybe that's a bit too strong. I'll go for one current on its own, which I did, the Mary current. And we put the copper probes in, and in the middle of that line, we got the 3 anomaly electromagnetic signals. If you put that outside of that current, you got Bo Diddley in effect. So there is something like rivers of energy, veins of energy that are going through the earth that the ancient man would recognize. Now you get some earth energies that are in temples like Abydos and everywhere, you know, you name a temple. But then you get energies, what are called like more domestic energies. And when you start looking at the settlements of the ancients, they would go on good pockets of energy, not bad pockets of energy. And it is a myth. An archaeologist will tell you the average age of somebody in the Neolithic period was 30. And you get Tony Robertson and, you know, all the other archaeologists all saying, yeah, they didn't live long and they had rotten teeth and they, you know. No, if you look to all the records, some of them lived to 85, 90. Wow. That is a fallacy. I could give you a paper now and show it up to you on this cam and say, oh, look what the average, some of them did die young, but we're in a society. You're going to get people dying in our era, you know, of a younger age. And when you look to their teeth, they didn't have sugar in their diet. We'll join the dots there. In fact, they had, you know, better average teeth than we do today because they had 0 sugar. So the ancient people were building monuments with temple types of energies, but then finding pockets of land that were very healthy, emitting healthy energies. And guess who looks for those today? You can guarantee stately homes are on that. Masonic lodges are on that. They know. When I went, I'm not going to mention any names, but when I got invited to a very large stately home in Wiltshire, and I was talking to the person there, they said, oh, we are on the spirals. We're on the good spirals. Now, you would have to be a master dowser to know what he was on about. And so I said, I'll find them then. And I found them. So I think that the reason why a lot of the aristocracy they have a better diet, the aristocracy, you know, they have nice holidays. I get all of that, yeah. But I think because they live on fantastic, good, life-enhancing earth energy, they live to a better age.
Don't they just?
Exactly, because they're living
when was
by
the last
that.
when was the last royal funeral that we've heard about? The Queen Mother, what was she, 102, 105?
Unless you're bumped off, of course. You know.
Unless you're bumped off. Yeah, avoid those Paris tunnels.
Now, an interesting thing is that I've been doing some research into, you may have heard of this story about the guy that saw the Roman ghosts coming out the cellar in York back in 1953. Harry Martindale was the name of the guy. He was an apprentice plumber, and he could hear a horn coming from somewhere, and he thought it was like a radio, but it was just playing one single note, and he was actually on a ladder which had been stuck into what was the original Roman road. It was actually been excavated in this cellar, which was a stately home. And this Roman road ran through one area of this stately home. And he then saw these Roman soldiers marching through it, and they were covered in mud and everything like that. Even a horse came through as well with a Roman soldier on it. And he described them having green tunics, which is very unusual because most Romans, you always assume to have red tunics. But he knew nothing about archaeology or history or anything like that. But he was adamant. He said, no, they had little round shields and green tunics. And when the historians looked into the whole thing, they discovered, and this was in the 1990s, they found this out. They discovered that it's actually where they were in York was a Roman fortress, and they had what they called, or what we would call, auxiliary Roman soldiers. In other words, they were like the backup Romans who were left in place after the main Romans went back to Rome, and they were left here to kind of keep the peace, as it were. And their rank was denoted by the fact they wore green tunics, and they had round shields rather than the rectangular ones. Now, I'm wondering, because obviously this cellar was dug into the ground, and they came out of one wall, walked straight through the cellar, didn't look at him at all because they were completely unaware, because it was like I don't know, in their own time frame, if you like, and then out through the other wall. I'm wondering, was some way or shape or form these ley lines or energy centers or whatever, were they maybe somehow involved in the formation of this sighting in some way? I'm trying to work out a theory, because I'll tell you some interesting things I've noted through this research is that just wasn't him that saw these ghosts. It was a warden of this building a year before had seen them. And he says, "Oh, you look like you've seen the ghosts, the Roman soldiers down in the cellar." And this warden had kept quiet about it. He didn't tell anyone for fear of ridicule. And so Harry Martindale, he gave up his job. He didn't want to tell anybody, but the word got out because he told his mates, and then the newspapers got hold of the story. Mm-hmm. Then about 4 or 5 years later, a new warden was now working on the site. It was a lady with 2 dogs, and she sighted the Roman soldiers not once, but 3 times on 3 different occasions in the winter months. October, November, and December, I think it was, she saw them. And she described them as well, having mud on their clothes, but they were doing different actions. Some were leading the horses through the cellar, and sometimes she would see them coming through the cellar actually on their horses, but slumped over the horses as if they're almost asleep on the horses, and the horses are marching them back to their base. But again, all covered in mud. So I was thinking about this. It suggests then that if they're covered in mud, that these Romans must have been marching in muddy fields, which must have been the winter time. So I checked into the weather patterns for like 2,000 years ago for that area, and they said that they were actually unusually warm climates back then. So much so that you could actually grow grapes in the area. So I thought, well, these Romans must have been spotted during their history of the winter, hence the rain and the mud on their clothes. But it also tied up with the months of their sighting in 1953 and 1957, again, both in the winter time. So I was formulating this theory that rather than them being a haunting, like we'd say a recording on the stone tape theory some people talk about, that's being replayed and we keep seeing the same thing. These were seeing different actions. These ghosts were doing different actions each time they were seen. So I was wondering if they're peering back through a window, a portal in time, if you like, back into those Romans. Now, if that cellar hadn't been cut through into the ground, you'd never see those Romans, because they were marching through what appears to us solid roads of present day. And it's only because you've cut into the hole in the ground, you see them at their level and see them walk through. Now, I'm wondering, do you think that maybe ley lines, energy lines, whatever you want to call it, they might be, with your frequencies and things, would they be maybe help generating sightings of ghosts? Has there been any kind of research into that idea?
Oh, there has been some research. Everybody thinks everything's down to a ley, but it's not. Sometimes it's a combination of lots of things rather than one. Well, there was a master dowser called Tom Lethbridge. He's very famous. He was around in the 70s. He was a Cambridge archaeologist that when he retired, he moved to Devon and ended up living next door to a witch, as you do in Devon. But anyway, he learned to dowse, and he became the master dowser of long cord pendulum dowsing. That's not where you get a little cord and you go, give me a yes, give me a no. This is where you have a 26.5 inches. Whenever that turns round, you've hit underground water. So how many ways it goes round is what you get. He looked into ghosts, and he looked into ghosts through the medium of dowsing. What he noticed time and time again going around Devon and other localities was that normally you have to have a combination of things. It can be ley lines. It can be like, a kind of vortex center of crossing of earth currents and that. But what he found even more common than that was underground water. And when you have misty conditions in the winter times rather than in the summer, you've got a lot of atmospheric water. Now, water to homeopaths has memory. And it can charge anything with memory. And in fact, the weaker it gets, the stronger it gets in homeopathy. And what Lethbridge looked at was all of the places where sightings of big major ghost events were, or apparitions and that type of thing, was on underground water courses flowing in the ground in mistier, wintry types of conditions as well, where you've got that moisture in the air, and that the water was recording the event as much as anything else, is like a kind of memory of it that can be played through. And he also doused places that had a lot of hang-ins or suicides and things like that, and found that was very large pockets of water there as well. And it kind of sucked you in if you were in a bad mood. You see what I mean? The energy would go vroom and bring you in as well. And he wrote quite a few books on that, about to do with ghosts, apparitions, underground water, and his long called pendulum dowsing. And he was very accurate. I mean, he would get dates of circles through long called pendulum dowsing.
I've got a couple of woo-woo questions based kind of on that, actually. There's a kind of like an almost like a that level woo-woo question, and there's a that level woo-woo question. So the first one is, have you heard reports recently of people getting tinnitus in the past week or so, or the past couple of weeks, like an amping up of tinnitus?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a friend of mine. He's called David Webb. He's been looking into electromagnetic sensitivity for many, many years, and he says there's a lot of microwave hearing around. If you Google it, it's microwave hearing, where that can be very tinnitus-like. But then there's a lot of people in Wiltshire, myself included, who hear a background noise that isn't tinnitus. And it's like a kind of humming sometimes, even in the dead of night when you've got everything off. You can hear this background frequency noise. So it's like there's a couple of things going on. But yeah, David Webb says it's that tinnitus sound that a lot of people are getting is microwave hearing.
So my kind of follow-on question from that was, I personally think it might be all these 5G towers and 5G satellites
for sure
that are amping up. However, there could be a possibility in terms of Earth energy changing as well. So do you think it's more 5G? Do you think it's Earth changing energies shifting, or do you think it's a bit of both?
Well, most of us feel that 5G is something wicked comes his way, as Shakespeare would say. I mean 4G is bad enough, really, kicking out these signals, and they will interfere with standing stones and stone circles as much as the new age positive people probably don't want to hear this. But we've picked up at Rollright man-made frequencies coming out of the stones. Yeah. So if we up that up, you are going to change a whole system that has been in place for up to 10,000 years of our history. And we don't know where that's going to lead us. I mean, standing stones, as I explained earlier, are designed to transmit energy. Now, who's to say that they're not going to start transmitting really bad man-made energies? I don't know.
What might be happening is that the 5G network might be trying to hijack mankind's ascension and spirituality and growth with the earth energies, the natural earth energies, hijack everything and kind of like introduce their own negative energies to kind of like deplete people's immune systems, to drive them crazy. Because the reason I ask about the tinnitus thing is that I've noticed a ramping up of it within the past week or so. I've always had in the background a bit of tinnitus, but it's really kind of like, it's gone up a level. It's gone up quite a considerable level, actually. And on Facebook, I put out a post saying, has anyone noticed kind of a bit of an increase in tinnitus? I got a whole deluge of people saying, yes, me, my friend, my mum, myself, my daughter, my son. It's really kind of taking off. So I suspect that what's going on in conjunction with this coronavirus, I think what's going on is a 5G network basically to destroy the human immune system. I don't think the coronavirus itself is a result of the 5G network, but I think the 5G network is being introduced to destroy human health, so the virus can take even more of an effect on people as a mass culling process.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
Well, what helped my microwave hearing was turning the router off at night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just little things like that. Then I noticed that the tinnitus sounds were easing. But, you know, we're all connected to the earth. And if we don't know what 5G is really going to do or really about, it's an experiment. And some people know the end result. We don't. But some people know the end result of it.
Apparently, the frequency that they use, which is apparently 60 gigahertz or something like that, is just below weapons grade. So if it was slightly above that, it would be an electromagnetic weapon, the same thing used as crowd control. And there was actually a Dutch minister who said, people asking her what it could be used for, smart technology, the future. One of the things she was asked, could it be used for crowd control? And she said, yeah, maybe it could be used for crowd control. So there's that. But apparently what this frequency also does is it depletes oxygen. It kind of like, I don't know how, but it sucks in or depletes oxygen. And we've got people in China kind of just dropping in the streets. Now, okay, if you've got pneumonia or you've got flu, you will be in bed. You will be finding it difficult to breathe. You'll be struggling to breathe, and you will know that you've got it. You don't just walk around a street and then drop dead. That just doesn't happen. So what's causing that? Interesting, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it is very interesting times that we live in. And as if somebody coming from Earth Mysteries, my concern is how all of this is going to be blending into the Earth. And humans, but I mean, it's not just us. I mean, some animals will follow particular types of Earth energy. They have been doing that generation after generation. Deer will follow what's called track lines, and so will cattle and wildebeest, and it gives you energy track lines. And that's why some country lanes are really wiggly in England, because they're the old trodden out by cattle. And if you start changing frequencies like that, you could be changing the whole ecosystem through the earth, and not just humans. It's bad enough any human dying in the street. Nobody wants that. But I think it could be a much bigger knock-on effect.
I mean, there was I think the US Navy were testing out a different type of sonar, and you got all these beached whales turning up, completely with
tinnitus.
It affected their navigation because a lot of animals use the Earth's electromagnetic energy to kind of go where they need to go, and apparently put the whales off kilter a little bit. So
exactly, that's a great analogy, because that's the type of thing I'm trying to explain. If you start to change one thing within the Earth energy system with 5G or military activity, then you are going to have a knock-on effect with the animals and the ecosystem, and we don't know where that will lead. And I think we have to take some sort of responsibility or stance against this.
Absolutely. Well, interestingly, one of the first places 5G was introduced, and I think it was very, very sly how they did it. So one of the first places was Glastonbury, and it was EE that brought it in at Glastonbury. And I think what they wanted to do...
Glastonbury Festival, just to be clear.
The Glastonbury Festival. I think they did that to try and get the hippies and the New Agers on board. So everyone's kind of like, oh, I've got really fast internet. Isn't it fantastic? And isn't it cool? Right? So Glastonbury Festival is a very cool thing for youths to go to and for young people to go to. So if you get them young, you get them used to it, and you get the trendy cool factor with the 5G, then you've kind of got them. But interestingly, Somerset Council have now banned 5G pending further investigations. I think that's exactly what needs to happen everywhere. I think I would implore people listening to this or watching this to get knowledgeable about 5G, what it is, the health implications of it, and really talk to councils to get this thing stopped until there were proper investigations. Now, there was apparently an independent study, and I think this came out in The Guardian, where they declared that it's safe. I want to know who's backing it, who funded it, who's behind that particular study, because I don't believe it. I think it's rubbish. And for people who would say, oh, well, we must always accept what the experts have got to say, and we mustn't question things like this, I would say to people, view a film called Dark Waters. Dark Waters was about DuPont putting out fluoride-based chemicals that kind of made Teflon, basically, and how it basically is poisoning and toxifying everything that it comes into contact with, allegedly. But this is kind of like an ongoing court case in America, and it turns out that Teflon might be absolutely horrendous. And the thing is, it's everywhere in terms of kind of the uses. And what DuPont was doing was saying that these are our safety standards, and we'll just change the goalposts if we don't like it. So I think that's the 5G industry, I think, is probably going to be doing the same thing. It's absolutely horrendous. I would urge people really to kind of get this stopped. And I'll come to my second woo-woo question, actually, Maria, because I'm kind of going.
I thought that was it.
going into a rant there. Yeah, it's just I can see the destruction of the human race happening right now, and it's kind of like, this is why I get quite fiery about it. But I'll come to my second woo-woo question, which is: have you heard of people out and about in deserted places and hearing kind of children laughing, or kind of odd noises, or growlings, or anything of that nature? Because I'm getting a few reports now of people kind of like being in quite deserted places, of either hearing like children laughing or hearing growling noises, and kind of there's more UFO activities, there's a bit more kind of paranormal ghostly type activities. Do you think that there's some kind of portal that's being opened, or something where there's more really weird stuff that's coming into this planet?
Well, we're in lockdown, and it's like anything, it's everybody else in lockdown. And can the other people go out and do what their bidding is? Yeah, I mean, that's a question. I think, not maybe certain people of certain orders are going out there and doing things. Yeah. Now I say that because one time I had an intuition round about Stonehenge at midsummer, because I think it's almost like a feeding ground. You get a lot of chaos energy there at Stonehenge, actually, at the summer solstice. And I hung around till quite late at night, and I thought something's going to happen. And lo and behold, round about 11:30, 11:45, black cars started pulling up outside of Stonehenge. And then, judging by the way that the people were walking, because at midsummer your eyes do adjust, and I was some distance away from the visitor centre, like a little kind of soldier doing this, as you do. And I saw about 8 people dressed in black get out of those cars and go towards the visitor centre. And you can't tell me that they're not going to go to Stonehenge. So what are they doing there at that time when you're not supposed to be there, and you're only supposed to get private access at particular hours and things like that? So with that in mind, my point is, we don't know what other people are doing out there with now everybody in lockdown, not seeing what's going on.
It's interesting, actually, because that's just stirred a little thought that I was discussing with some people online, actually, and we were talking about Quatermass experiment, and I think it's Chris Evers who does a show on the Paranormal UK radio network with Philip Mantle, and Chris Evers was saying, wasn't there a Quatermass series with John Mills in? And I said, yes, there was. And I said, I think it was something to do with Stonehenge. And it was like back in either the late 70s or early 80s. And I had vague memories of watching it. I really didn't understand what was going on. So I did a quick search on YouTube today, and I found like episode 4 or something. So I couldn't quite get the whole thing. But it's to do with all these young teenagers getting hooked on powers of Stonehenge or stone circles or something. And
wow, I want to watch that program.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. So it's Quatermass, and I can't think if there's another title with it, but it's Quatermass John Mills, and it's 1979, 1980. You might be able to get it on DVD, or call it up on one of these old channels or something. But I was thinking, crikey, you know, what you've been talking about there, and all these secret people going to Stonehenge Visitor Centre late at night. And it's just struck a bell with me with this Quatermass experiment, or whatever the show was called, with Sir John Mills in. So for anyone listening that wants to check it out, it's John Mills and Quatermass. It might have been called the Quatermass Effect or something, but I can't remember the whole thing. But Quatermass was a long-standing kind of science fiction character, because they had different films in the 50s and 60s, and I think even a radio show, Quatermass. Professor Quatermass, he was a scientist, and he's supposedly saving England or Britain or even the Earth from invading whatever's aliens, God knows what else. And so this was a remake of the Quatermass thing with John Mills in 1979. The time is ripe to make a new one with Professor Quatermass battles tetanus in your ear and and coronavirus and that'd be a cool one, wouldn't it? But yeah, interesting.
Going back to the humming thing, and you know, following on from the tinnitus thing, Maria, I've also heard the humming thing when I haven't got tinnitus too bad, because with me it comes and goes. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak. But I used to think for ages that there was some roadworks going on at night outside. I used to not think too much about it. It was almost like a power generator, or kind of like, you know, maybe there's kind of like, you know, a generator in the background, you know, for the lights and stuff. But it kept going on and on and on and on. I thought, hang on, there's not really any roadworks going on nearby. And this is late at night. What the hell's going on? But another thing people have been hearing is things like kind of loud bangs at night. Have you heard about these? Like these explosion noise or banging noises? You know, a bit like that. And going back to the children's laughter, the vibe I get with it, not so much child sacrifices, which is what I think you might be alluding to with kind of like the black cars and the black hooded people, but maybe some kind of weird technology where they're testing either voice to skull, or I think what the technology is, voice to skull or something like that, or maybe they're kind of like taking a certain area and seeing how people react, kind of like to kind of strange noises or odd things going on. I don't know what you feel about that. It's almost like they're testing something, or testing reactions.
Well, it could well be that. I mean, again, you know, it'd probably be far easier now to do experimentation on people than ever before, because not many people are going out to you know, explore things. And we've definitely had in this area for many, many years that background noise. In fact, people call it the background noise, and it can go up and it can go down. It's almost like, you know, it's slowly going up and then it will shoot down, and then occasionally it gets switched off, and then you think, I can't hear it, and then it will come back on. And loads of people in this area hear that, and we're not that far from the military base on Salisbury Plain. Now, whether it's military, whether it isn't, I personally don't know, but I know that that's what I hear from time to time.
I mean, for nighttime noises, if you hear them, Andy, but you know, you think it's roadworks. I mean, I just took a guess and thinking, okay, you might have a little generator, for instance, doing temporary traffic lights, possibly. That might be one reason, or that's what
that's what I was thinking. That's what I thought it was. Yeah.
But it's interesting.
It would go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Days, weeks, months.
Yeah.
And then it was actually the time period that made me question it, because if it was just for a week, I'd just naturally assume it's roadworks and think nothing of it. But I kept noticing it, and I was just thinking, are they really still going on? Is it really still happening? And then as I was driving around in the local area, I was looking out for it and thinking, actually, there's no roadworks.
Yeah, I think that's true. That there is sounds going on.
You could probably check on your local council website about roadworks that are happening in the area to see if it kind of backs up anything, you know, to see if there's roadworks in certain roads. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do get things where they're moving the roadworks up the road, like doing a pipe here and then doing. I mean, there's roadworks near where I am at the moment.
Shouldn't the noise in that case eventually go down and down and down?
Yeah, it depends which side it is. I mean, I completely agree. There might be something weird going on. I just don't know. But I'm just thinking the skeptics will say, "Oh, it's got to be a generator or something like that causing it." It could be that you're artificially hearing it, because if there's a low frequency being sent out from somewhere, it could be causing a noise in your own ear, similar to the tetanus sort of thing. Which, incidentally, I did have some of that this afternoon. You messaged me saying, "Are you getting this tetanus stuff?" I'm, nah, or not really. And then suddenly this afternoon, I suddenly got it, and I thought, "Ooh, that's a bit weird. I'm suddenly getting it." Yeah. So I got out of my little pyramid, and I thought, well, now talking of pyramids and things like that, you've looked at some of the pyramids, haven't you, Maria? Is there a kind of connection with that and stone circles?
Well, I mean, throughout the ancient world, in very different cultures, you get, different types of temples being built. And, Egypt is one of those places where it's exotic, it's charismatic, and the structures there can be life-changing. I mean, they really can. I mean, we get private access to the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, and the subterranean chamber that's about 1,000 feet below the Great Pyramid. And that's, absolutely incredible. And it's really very intense, the energies in there. I mean, it's on these huge underground aquifers. It's got loads of earth currents going through it, and it's got loads of lays going through it. It's like pumped up to volume 11. Places in Egypt. And as soon as you go into the Great Pyramid, you do feel a complete energy change. And it builds up and builds up with all of the temples that you go through as well in Egypt. And some of them are absolutely incredible because they kind of link to each other, a bit like we say in the standing stones link. They link up to each other, going all the way down the Nile. And they've got lots of energies crossing them, like at a right angle as well. So sometimes you get like cross effect or star effect of these earth energies, and they're incredible. And sound toning in the King's Chamber, that's quite amazing as well. So there's these places literally can put us into an altered state of consciousness very, very fast. Now, when you come to these massive places, big temple spaces, or a big stone circle like Avebury Henge, you can fit thousands of people into Avebury. You can't into Stonehenge. Stonehenge is more condensed. But I think that was the people of the ancient societies were going there and having their collective consciousness changed all at once. It might not have been about you as an individual, but you as a group, because the massive temples can have so many people in there.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the French researcher getting mummified, and as soon as you said mummified, I thought, oh, Egypt and stuff like that, mummies. Is there any kind of connection between that mummification of the French dowser guy and the ancient mummies in pyramids, or is it just a loose, arbitrary connection of sorts?
The French diviners, Chaumery and de Belizal, said that that's what they thought contributed towards that. Not in totality. You'd still have to have certain processes done to mummify someone. In Orkney as well, they mummified people in the bogs in the Neolithic period as well to preserve their bodies in part mummification. So I think that was the negative green that played a role in that. It wasn't it by itself, but it played a major role. And then they said shapes can generate the negative green. So you could have a dome shape, for example, and all Neolithic cairns in Scotland or long barrows tend to have that what's called corbelled shape like that. That generates energy by itself, the shape. So some of the shapes of the synagogues and other things are generating a type of earth energy through the shape as well as the earth energy it's sited upon. So it's you can go into quite great detail, and the pyramid itself is another shape that will generate that energy as well as being on the earth energy.
I wonder now, you're talking about like a dome shape. I'm wondering now if that's like, again, connected with UFOs and flying saucers, and they're generating a certain shape by being the shape they are. to do their whatever they have to do, fly or go through vortexes or whatever they do, if they do that kind of thing. It's an interesting idea. Lots of ideas to be explored. Well, we're coming to the end. I just wanted to hear about this this guy that you said saw this energy coming out of a stone circle. We discussed it in the break. And he only told people a year before he died. He didn't want to tell anybody for years. Can you tell us that story briefly again?
Yeah, that was Major Menzies. In the 1940s, he was at Stanton Drew Stone Circle in Somerset, which is it's all in situ, the stones. They haven't been re-erected or set in concrete. He said he was doing a compass bearing at the time. He was doing a survey of Stanton Drew. And all of a sudden, on a dull day, lightning struck one of the stones. It illuminated it in a kind of gold molten color. That color went all around the other stones as well, and it was emitting light but not heat, when fire, as witches would call that. And he was really awestruck. And then he said the energy started to ascend up like a pillar of light and at the same time spiral down to the earth. And he said it was a time in his life where he saw heaven connected to earth. So that was a very unique experience. He was a World War I engineer of the army as well. So he was very good at observation. And that's what he said he saw at Stanton Drew. And he told a friend in 1952, a year before he died.
Wow. So he obviously kept quiet about it because he didn't want to be ridiculed. And this the guy with engineering credentials. So it's not anyone to kind of be laughed at, really, is it? With that kind of credentials. Right.
Exactly.
We're actually coming to the end now of our 2-hour epic on the Paranormal Peep Show. Thank you very much, Maria, for taking part. Now, you mentioned that you're busy writing a book during lockdown. Do you want to tell our listeners and viewers what that's about?
Yep, that's going to be taking earth energies into a different level. It's going to be looking at the harmonics of stone circles, which is all to do with creating energy from that. It's looking at the long-skulled people. I've tracked some really fine examples down. They're absolutely extraordinary. I've just had some of the artwork done on that. It's really out of this world, it looks, actually. So I'm busy writing all about the ancient world, the beings or the people that were in that ancient world, and combine that with all of my knowledge on ley lines as well. And I go beyond England as well to other places such as Malta and Sardinia in the book, and it explores those sites as well. It's really, a love of mine, and I just want to get the truth out that's been suppressed. That's what I want to do. I want to tell the story of the ancient world that it should be told because it's true and because it's reality.
Okay, great. And what's the title of that book?
Well, it's a kind of, work in progress. I haven't really thought about the title too much yet. It's kind of, I'm just, writing it. But
okay,
yeah.
But they can find out about, presumably you're on your Facebook and things like that, but also on your own website, you'll put that book once it's up and ready. So if people want to find out about the work you've done, other books you've written, and all the things you've been involved in, they can go to your website. And if you want to tell people about your website.
That's right. I've got two websites. One's my tours and dowsing website, and that's the Avebury Experience.co.uk. I've got lots of fascinating articles on there and all of my books. Then I teach dowsing online these days, lo and behold. And I teach other subjects like past life regression and tarot and astrology. And my teaching platform is esotericcollege.com, and I'm fully affiliated with the distant learning colleges, so all of my courses can be taken, if wished to certificate level. And I do very advanced dowsing courses and beginners classes as well. Something for everybody.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot of things to get your teeth into. Andy, any final words before we depart?
Just stay safe. Try your best to get in touch with councils and stop 5G, or at least get them to stop it until there's a proper investigation inquiry. Take care of yourselves, and be good to have Maria back on board at another point.
Absolutely. And so I'd like to say thank you very much, Maria, for joining us, and also to the audience for listening to us once more on the Paranormal Peep Show. Remember to stock up on your toilet roll, and also now I'm going to start stocking up on cotton buds to sort out my tittiness.
Your tits in your ears.
my tits in my ears. Well, I've already got the face mask, so why not go one step further? So join us again next month on the Paranormal Peep Show. From Andrew Chaplin and myself and Maria Wheatley, it's good night from us. Take care. Bye-bye.